Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Lambert, and I'm joined tonight by my fellow supervisors, Rich Orlo and Peter Fixler, here at this table. I'd like to call to order our special meeting with ongoing remediation discussions. Please rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, welcome to tonight's discussion and question-answer session regarding the ongoing remediation efforts at the former Bishop Tube site. The intent of this meeting is to make our environmental consultant, BSTI, Tony Finding, and Nicholas Santelli, and Jill is in the audience, to answer your questions regarding the township's review of the proposed DEP pre-remedial design investigation. We're streaming live via Zoom. The meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available in its entirety via our website and can be viewed online via Facebook. And That's a Wrap, which highlights the main points from all of our supervisor meetings on our Facebook page. If you haven't already, please be sure to sign up for the email notifications from the township, which can be done online via the website or by scanning the QR code on the flyer in the lobby. A few points regarding the flow of the meeting this evening. Please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. We're happy to go back to specific slides during the question and answer period of the meeting. For those joining virtually, please raise your hand to speak and wait until you're called upon to unmute and begin speaking. We will not be monitoring all or responding to the chat feature within Zoom tonight. We ask you to come up and speak into the microphone and refrain from shouting from the audience. When you approach the mic, please provide your name and address. We'll try to be flexible here, but please try to limit your questions to a 3 to 4 minute period per commentator. We hope to conclude the meeting around 9:15. Again, we've got some flexibility on those issues, but if we can kind of adhere to those, we appreciate it. So with that, Zach, is there any specific things you would like to add, or?
No, I think it's helpful to just kind of have some ground rules to keep the meeting organized, but really it's BSTI from here.
Okay. So I guess at this point in time, we'll turn it over to you guys.
So I guess I'll take it away, Tony, unless you had something you wanted to say first. So I'm Nick Santella with BSTI. I'm a hydrogeologist and geochemist. Tony Finding, you want to introduce yourself? Yep. There you go.
Tony Finding, I'm a principal scientist with BSTI, and we've been working on the project for a little bit here now, and we're here to answer questions to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, so to set things up, we're just going to really quickly run through a couple of slides. Sure, I can move that up. I'm not the loudest person out there. So we'll just give a quick overview, hopefully not take a lot of time, just to set the stage. Some of this will be related back to the last PADEP meeting. Just give a couple of broad brush things that have come up since really the last time we've had a meeting about this, when the draft statement of decision was out. So I guess if you want to bring up the next slide. We just wanted to start off with kind of a quick overview of sort of the roles that PADEP and the township are taking in this overall process. Not to belabor the point, but the PADP has had the Bishop Tube site in the hazardous site cleanup program for quite a long time now. They have the authority to either perform a cleanup or to direct someone to perform a cleanup. They're responsible for selecting a remedy that's protective. And the good news, and it's become clear in the final statement of decision, is that they intend to remediate the site to a residential cleanup standard, would make it appropriate for both under the Act 2 program for both residential and recreational use. That was really all that was there. Next slide. The township, on the other hand, has a responsibility for compliance with regulations regarding development planning codes, municipal ordinances, and the most recent activity has been the preliminary land development approval, which has included a number of requirements related to environmental conditions that needed to be addressed during the development process. So specifically, there were a bunch of conditions that were set back in 2017 by the zoning board. Those are some of the slightly superseded language regarding the remediation by excavation of 3 TC hotspots, as well as a bunch of additional requirements. But there were also a bunch of general requirements intended to address the environmental site conditions during the development process. And if you don't mind, the next slide just provides a bunch of the specifics. A little bit much to read, but the overall point is that prior to construction, the site is required to be remediated to a residential standard, and that remediation has to occur prior to any excavation work at the site. There's some additional requirements related to the ASTDR recommendations for development, and addressing all the potential exposure pathways at the site, which are basically reiterating the things that PADP would require during the Act 2 process. So with that, these are just a couple of slides from the last PADP public meeting, so they should look familiar. They're starting to close in a little bit on some specifics. There are 3 areas, these TCE hotspots that have been talked about for quite a long time, that are planned for remediation by soil mixing, and they've narrowed it down to 5 additional areas that they intend to look at in more detail during the remedial design investigation. Most of those are 3 of them at least, are related to inorganic constituents. Some of them have some TC at lower concentrations as well. So that's going to be one of the focuses of the remedial design investigation. Also in that last meeting, they provided kind of a first conceptual look at what groundwater remediation might look like. It's notable that the areas that are covered by the potential groundwater injections are pretty large, a pretty significant section of the northern property line, as well as one of the major TCE hotspots, or the area underneath that TCE hotspot. Next is just talking quickly about the timeline of remediation. PADP kind of touched on that. This is the same timeline that's on their website currently. They're intending to have a work plan for some of the remedial design investigation in the spring of this year, actually perform remedial investigation work in the summer, and everything else is to be determined. But it's just worth keeping in mind, and in that remedial implementation, we've kind of got it listed out in the statement of decision. They talk about the soil remediation the active portion of the soil remediation, I should say, taking about 4 years, and the active portion of the groundwater remediation, so injections, monitoring, doing more injections, taking about 7 years. And those might overlap entirely or partially. They might not overlap at all. So the active part of the remediation process can be quite extensive. And then they discussed monitoring that remedial action for something like 23 years or longer as it goes into monitored natural attenuation. So it's just good to keep in mind that those are very long time frames that we're talking about for remediation. Sure, I guess, I don't know. If you
Yeah,
can come
yeah.
up to ask a question.
Yeah, you have to
I
come
mean,
up to
sure,
the
if it's-
mic. You have to come up to the mic so so people on Zoom can hear. And you folks probably see the court reporter here, so you need to identify yourself and speak one at a time, otherwise she'll tell you to speak one at a time.
Sure. Thank you. I didn't know if I was allowed to do that, so that was my ask. Kathleen Stauffer, 64 Fawnstock Road, Malvern. The remedy monitoring for 23 years, if there is building, the potential building allowed to be on that site? Or is it going to take 23 years?
So I think that's a question that I can't truly answer, because I think that's something that ultimately PADP will have the primary control over. I will say there are a lot of potentials for physical conflicts between development and the active part of remediation. So there might be a reasonable anticipation that at least the active part of the remediation would prohibit
But would there
site
be a
development.
conflict? I understand that you can't answer this question. So there might be a conflict between the monitoring and structure on the property.
I think it's possible. There is a much bigger potential for conflict between the active remediation and structures on the property.
Thank you.
That might have been most of it. I've got a little bit more detail, again, from the PADB slides about the remedial design investigation, but that was really intended to be all we had to say as a quick overview. There weren't a lot of major developments, since the statement of decision. It's really, really that the statement of decision, it reflects a residential site use is kind of very important from a public safety perspective. And I think the other useful thing that came through in the last PADP meeting was that they are now sort of conceiving, light on specifics, but conceiving some institutional controls coming early in the process, which would answer some of these basic questions about sort of when they interpret remediation to be complete. With that, meaning DEP. So with that, we're just here to answer questions.
Hi, Rachel Johnson, 22 Woodview Road, Malvern. So the area where it talks about the soil remediation for the neighborhoods that are in close vicinity to this, what is the impact?
Again, I can't answer everything for PADP, but they did touch on the potential for impacts to air, impacts to surface water, and the need to control those impacts during the remediation process. So typically that would take the form of some kind of perimeter air monitoring that would occur during the remediation process, things like peeling up the concrete, the actual soil mixing process, all of those, there could be vapors, with the potential to affect nearby residents. So those are kind of the the biggest. Obviously, traffic, there would be vehicle traffic even with an in-situ remedy. There's a lot of chemicals that are involved that have to be brought into the site, a lot of heavy equipment. So there certainly are a lot of those potential impacts that need to be addressed in the actual remedial design, which is still a little ways away at this point. But really, all those specifics will need to be described in the remedial design.
Yeah, and I'll add to it. So for remedial excavations, you know, if they're going in, they're going to excavate, open up the ground. Typically for a project like this, there are controls in place, like Nick referred to with the perimeter air monitoring plan. And what that typically are dust monitors, VOC monitors that get set up throughout the site, upgrading, downgrading the wind, and with real-time monitoring and data. So you can actually, if there is an issue, you see that information right away. Also, for if trucks are entering, leaving the site, they typically have a certain area that they're allowed to leave in which they get washed down, so there's no tracking of any kind of soil off-site.
And as far as that, just as monitoring, how is that then communicated out to the area?
Well, with new technology, I know down at the old Philly refinery, you can see that data. So that you could do real-time data, and again, it's up to the DEP to share it, but we should have access real-time with that,
Okay.
with the technology we have now.
And then the investigation, what is happening during that time? You could elaborate on that a little bit and what that means to the community.
Sure, actually, maybe it'd be a good time to flip. I think it's 2 slides there. I mean, so PADB talked a little bit about that. You know, they're looking at groundwater in kind of the northeast corner of the site. It seems like the plume kind of takes a bit of a jog, and they're kind of confirming some of that on the other side of the stream. You know, obviously, any of these activities will have truck traffic, but, you know, they're kind of small scale, the investigation activities, and really wouldn't be anticipated to affect people off-site. They were also looking at the PFAS that was detected in groundwater on-site. You know, they will need to determine how far it extends off-site and where and to what extent it's present in the site soils. That could conceivably affect the remedial approach. And we're looking at kind of the inorganic constituents in those areas that were highlighted in yellow on the map, kind of where are some of these source areas, how extensive, and also demonstrating that some of the metals that were observed are naturally occurring, which is kind of the background study that they're talking about in the last bullet. And really none of those are expected, I would imagine, to have large-scale off-site impacts. It's, you know, kind of a couple of guys with a truck sort of scale.
You knew my next question. Thank you.
So before the next person comes up, so there still is pre-remediation investigation to occur?
Right. So what they're intending to do, hopefully in the summer this year, is additional investigation that will be incorporated into the remedial design. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, once they have their results, we don't know, but is it possible that their remediation approach will be altered and a new decision issued?
I would say, based on what they have indicated, that seems unlikely. Most of this pertains to kind of details about the distribution of the contaminants that are already known. The general remedial approach is driven kind of by the nature of those contaminants. So they're, the areas that they target may change a little bit, but my suspicion is that their overall approach will not.
Nick, I wanted to ask you. Beat you. In September, they were not able to give a time frame when they may have a remediation plan put together. I know they talked about starting in the summertime. Have you heard anything recent as far as a potential time frame when they're going to try to propose what the remediation process is going to look like?
I am not aware of any update of what that kind of remedial design may look like. I mean, it's also a fairly lengthy process to develop the remedial design, and they talked about that in their last presentation as well. You have kind of like a 30% design, a 90% design, a final design, and there's kind of feedback at each one of those steps. So I would be surprised. I shouldn't speculate, but I mean, it could easily take a year. I mean, once they have all the information that they're planning to collect in the summer.
This is maybe a double question. Since the... Oh, that's right. I forgot that. Sarah Caspar, East Brandywine, Guthriesville. I live, yes, I don't live in Whiteland, but I've been involved with this community for several years now. So prior to another life, I worked for US EPA, and I know a lot about PFAS, and since I've learned a lot more. And so I have a question. PFAS is very volatile. It loves water. It goes right into it, and it goes everywhere. So you're going to have it everywhere. And it's going to be all over the site. It's not going to be in the one spot that was sampled. We're lucky that that spot was sampled, because otherwise we never would have known that PFAS was there, although it had the type of industry that was there. So my question in relation to PFAS is this: how is it going to be disposed of? There is no known way to destroy it.
Do you want to take that one?
Well,
We can-
I mean, they just started investigating it. Obviously, they have to look at soils as well. And as part of the remedial design, they will have to address how are they disposing of it.
Well, it's going to be a problem with the soil there that they were planning to, I think, what were they planning to do?
For the remediation?
Yeah, it was it's sort of like
reductives,
capping it,
yeah.
but not quite. But you can't do that with PFAS because of its mobility.
Well, the soil mixing, I mean, is destructive to the TCE, right? I mean, it reacts with, whatever reducing chemistry and breaks down the TCE. There's some theory that may work to some extent with PFAS, but
No.
it's not an accepted remedy, and I think
It's
the
not.
baseline assumption would be that whatever remedy is applied to the TCE may not have much of any effect on PFAS, although if it was EVI, it might increase the absorption a little bit. So I think the answer is they may just be assuming that the PFAS is kind of no more mobile than the TCE, and if it's, it's possible. Right.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that is why they need to look off-site, right? So far, there has only been
Every-
on-site.
So, all the studies that are current, there is no remedy for PFAS. EPA is working on it, but they have not yet come up with a way of destroying it. So that is a critical situation anywhere that PFAS is found. And unfortunately, it's found everywhere now. So we know it's going to be in the Little Valley Creek, and we know it's in Valley Creek because it's been sampled and found. So there are streams on the way to Valley Creek that join into Little Valley Creek. And so these are areas that need to be sampled as well. So these are things that when DEP first got into this, they had no clue with it. They're coming up to speed as best they can, but they've got a long way to go. And as far as long ways to go, it's going to be a long way before that site can be developed. I mean, decades. Do you know that? Do you realize that? Are you aware of that? That it's going to take that long because of the properties of PFAS? God, I'm sorry. I'm terrible with mics. So I can wave it, but that's about all.
No, I guess I'll just maybe, much of that is true. I guess I'll just say that obviously the TC on its own would create a timeline of decades for full remediation of the
Yes,
site.
that's true also.
And that some of the exposure pathways associated with TCE are the same as the exposure pathways associated with PFAS, primarily drinking. And that pathway is intended to be addressed by the remediation. Obviously, there was one potable well, and I would suspect,
Two.
although so I'm sure that I shouldn't speculate. It's very possible that PFAS extends off-site, because in my limited experience, and everyone's experience with PFAS is limited at this point, it has a similar distribution when it, co-occurs with chlorinated solvents, that they're both quite mobile. They can vary, and it depends on a lot of environmental conditions, obviously, but they are both quite mobile. So it is not entirely unreasonable to believe that the institutional engineering controls intended to prevent off-site exposure to TCE would also be protective of exposure to PFAS. That may not necessarily be true, and especially when you talk about, the very wide variety of PFAS compounds that could be present. But I think that's a reasonable first approach, let's say. There's a lot of specifics that need to be pinned down.
I have one other question. From the beginning of being involved with this, I have wondered why this was Act 2. It's much too heavily contaminated, and two wells, drinking water wells, have been contaminated. That's atypical of an Act 2 site.
Yeah, and to clarify, this is not an Act 2 site per se. It's being remediated to Act 2 standards, but it is not a voluntary remediation site. Nobody's going to just walk away. It's in the hazardous site cleanup program. PADP is directly directing the remediation. So it is different from an Act 2 site where the cleanup is voluntary. But it's the same standards.
Well, that leads to another thing, but I won't go into that. But I think I really have always wondered why it wasn't an EPA site, a Superfund site, because that was what it qualified for. Hi.
Hi.
You want to take over?
Yeah, can I take over?
I'm
Thank you.
I just wanted to, Kathleen Stauffer, 64 Fawnstock Road. Just a concern of what Rachel had a question about what might happen to the neighbors and stuff. My daughter is a survivor of brain tumors, and is suspect. Bishop Tube was active at the time that I was pregnant, and it was suspect that the airborne TCEs affected my daughter. It was a slow-growing tumor that was finally discovered when she was 16. When you talk to her or some of the Great Valley kids, how many of the children in this area were sick, how many adults who lived in our neighborhood sick or died over the years, how many times we were evacuated in our neighborhood because of Bishop Tube. Not only that, the north wind blows. So when you talk about air remediation, my biggest concern is how are you going to control that? And you're on the south side of a mountain. I live adjacent. I climb that mountain every day with my dogs. So that's a big concern of mine. So with Rachel and what she said, the health of we were known as a cancer hub. We were known as a cancer hub. We don't want that to happen again.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously a very serious issue, and I think it, again, I can't speak to the exact nature of the monitoring that will occur during remediation, but I think the point that Tony makes about making that information public available, is kind of the best way to provide a little bit of transparency and trust in the process. That's, it's possible to do, and I really can't say a lot more than that.
Yeah, until we see that plan, ultimately, it comes down to what is their plan to control those potential off-site emissions? There's one of monitoring, but there's other things they can do to prevent, vapors from going off-site. I've seen digs where they've put tents around the excavation and created a negative atmosphere to keep vapors from migrating off-site. But it comes up to, what the DEP plans to do.
Yeah. And I hear you, and I know a lot of this has to do with the DEP. One of my concerns, and I'm just going to put this on the record, is when Constitutional Drive Partners wanted to build there, that the DEP gave him a covenant not to sue. And we made sure that was overturned. But the trust issue in this is big,
We understand that.
So just on the record, it's just like, yeah, that's why we're here, and that's why we keep asking about this. There was something else I wanted to say, but I forget what it was. I'll be back.
Bill Connigan, 74 Village Way, Malvern. This coming spring, my family and I will be here 30 years. And it's only in the last 7 years that I'm aware of Bishop. And hold it closer. Okay, echo. So I've been here a long time, but for so long I was unaware of what was down the street from me. And when the development plans were presented, it seemed strange to me that somebody would want to build on a polluted site where the chemicals were unknown, and I think the developer was hoping that he would just be able to pave over the property and build all these homes. One of my concerns then is that we have TCE, which can go with the water, but it's also airborne. And what I think of is that, do we know if it's airborne currently, and does anybody monitor that? I can think of 6 to 8 children on Village Way who are going to be up and down the street all the time. So my question really is that kind of monitoring happening now, or are we assuming that it's only underground?
I guess I would say, to my knowledge, there is no current air monitoring ongoing. as part of the risk assessment in the RI, they would have made some sort of modeling-based evaluation of potential exposure through ambient air. Typically, that's not a major exposure pathway because it's so quickly mixed in. Sort of, it does come out of the ground, but in the open atmosphere, it becomes mixed to low concentrations at a very rapid level, whereas in a building, there is a much greater potential that it would build up to a potentially
I
harmful
guess my
level.
concern then is how much buildup of TCE does it take to affect me? A lot, a little, who knows?
Well, I mean,
You know?
it is not a lot. In the context of indoor air, the action levels are quite low, and there's
Right.
obviously a lot of potential negative health effects,
Right,
and
right.
quite low levels for fetal development effects as well as, cancer effects. So the vapor intrusion issue probably is, in the absence of a lot of groundwater use, the biggest potential exposure pathway. But it is primarily, within buildings rather than through the ambient air. Once the soil is disturbed, and specifically once the concrete gets peeled off the surface and, soil that has not previously been exposed to the atmosphere, that I think is the point in time where there's a larger potential that there may be ambient concentrations that would be at a level of concern, and that might need to be controlled by mitigation measures during the remediation work.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Carol Rapp. I'm at 89 Village Way. So I'm 5 houses away from this site. I've had 3 dogs die from cancer, dogs that were outside most of the time. My concern is the monitoring, being 5 houses away, and there's people here who are closer. Is there gonna be a monitor in my neighborhood, in my street? Like I'm not gonna be glued to a computer to watch the work. I could be outside cutting the grass, I could be outside doing, walking the dog, I could be doing whatever. How am I gonna know? Because by the time it's caught that there's an issue, isn't it too late? We've already been exposed. I feel like it's like radiation, like a nuclear radiation situation. Seriously. I mean, and I'm concerned. They lift that building, they lift that concrete. I mean, I just don't know how anyone can guarantee any of our safety. And putting our lives at risk for this developer is just insane to me. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is a very real issue, and I guess just to talk through how these types of things might typically work, kind of as Tony pointed out, like you would typically have some type of air monitoring kind of right where this construction is occurring for the safety of the workers specifically. And that monitoring would be used to determine whether there was either changes in, protective equipment or changes in the work practice that need to be made. So like air concentrations get too high, you have to stop peeling back concrete, or you have to spray foam to reduce vapors, some measure. And then there would be kind of perimeter air monitoring around the edges of the property that would be the kind of thing that would be more likely to be made public, and is just to kind of guarantee that you may have a certain level where you're going to stop work or change work practice, but there's probably some lower level that you don't want going off site at all, that you don't want to have anything that would be over ambient air quality standards.
So how do you rein that back in? You lift the lid. How do you keep it away from my house?
Right, and I guess the answer is it doesn't happen all at once. The work has to proceed in stages, and perhaps it needs to be slowed down or it needs to be changed if the vapor concentrations do turn out to be too high. You know, and again, that all needs to be specified, and these are the kind of things that we have to keep an eye out for once the plans become concrete, because all of those things need to be spelled out in detail, you know, preferably with as much transparency as possible.
Yeah. Sorry. The other question I have, and this might be, I don't know if you'll know this, but how are the vehicles and heavy equipment going to access this site? They're not coming through my neighborhood, are they?
Well, I mean, there's
I don't-
really only one access that I'm aware of, right?
There
I don't-
is right now, yes.
So,
Yeah, that's the only way they'd be able to come in.
Okay. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
railroad. There's a freight train.
Yep.
So
That-
there's big trucks from other businesses that get it, oil trucks, I guess. So I don't know how big these vehicles are gonna be that come in and do this work
Right.
at the site, but we sure as heck don't want them coming down our road.
Yeah, we don't know what that plan is. I don't think
Yeah, I
we've
mean,
seen it.
would
But again,
typically be traffic, you know, management plans associated with a large project like this. So, I mean, again, it's just something that the specifics need to be determined and need to be made public, but just aren't known right now.
and also, I think I said this earlier, for vehicles entering, leaving the site, they typically have wash down areas to ensure that no impacted soil is leaving the site.
And where
Yeah,
does that washed down material go?
That,
Down the road into the stream and,
It's
that,
supposed to
mean,
be collected and treated,
that gets
so.
collected, it's a process. They'll lay down hay bales, plastic, whatever it may be to capture all this water. It gets just, lack of a better term, drummed and disposed of. That's, these hazardous waste sites, that's how they have to handle these. You know, there's only one way in and out to ensure that impacted soil is not leaving the site.
yeah. Because that stream is right there. It
Yep.
is right there. Okay, and then I'm sure I'll be back, like Kate said, she'll be back. So if this is gonna, you're not sure if the monitoring is gonna happen for any period of time before any construction could begin, right? So my question is, we're at least 7 years. Why do we keep extending approval of this development? And that's for the supervisors. Why do we, like, the next thing I think is visited in April. Why do we keep doing that? This is gonna be at least 7 years. Are you gonna do that every 3 months? And then we all have to show up at the meeting. You know what I mean? And so I'm just trying to understand that. Why can't we just say, no, we're not moving forward. It has to be remediated before any kind of thought can be put into what can be done with that property. I just don't understand it. And I know I bring this up over and over and over again. It's just boggles my mind. And we don't trust anybody regarding this site because it was the township that approved it to be residential. So we don't really trust anybody fully, so we show up for everything. Somebody in our group shows up because we just can't trust that our interests are going to be considered. And it's crazy to me. It's just crazy to me.
Hi, Jeanette Hooven, 61 Fallenstock Road. With the transporting of the dirt in these trucks, I've been behind trucks that are covered and stuff is still flying. How is that protected any differently than normal construction dirt?
Well, in this specific case, I mean, they're proposed, I don't know whether there may be some soil that leaves the site, but the remedy is intended to be a soil mixing kind of on the site. So they wouldn't actually be, you know, removing a large volume of soils as part of the remedy. So that, the good part about that is it does mitigate some of those issues. Obviously, it's possible to, transport contaminated soils in a more sealed fashion, more closed roll-offs, but that shouldn't be the case here, and that does cut down on some of the issues associated with the transportation. So there will be reagents kind of coming onto the site, there'll be heavy equipment coming onto the site, there'll be activity on the site, but there won't be a lot of soil leaving.
Okay. The other piece is, I was born and raised in the house that I'm in, and this whole Bishop Tube thing has been a thorn in our side since yay high. But I just can't believe that we're at the point where we're going to try to develop homes on a toxic site. It's just, like Carol said, it's mind-boggling that anybody would even consider. And one of my questions, and I think Kate had answered it, was if it got to the point where it gets developed, is it going to be written so that people buying these properties know what they're buying, what it's sitting on? I mean, I think about, I'm a gardener, I love to garden in my yard, and I still, every year, think, what am I doing? And is this okay to be building on, gardening in my ground? But I just refuse to. And I've been one of the lucky ones. I've been healthy, knock on wood. A lot of my friends and neighbors growing up were not. But I've seen plenty of death, plenty of sickness, and who would even want to buy this property? Unless if they don't know any different in the area. I mean, why? And from what I'm looking at on the sign, they said 7 years. I'm thinking, you guys shouldn't even be developing for 23 years. So why don't we just do away with this? And I know I'm one of the few that want to just take down the steel building and leave it go. Inject whatever you want to try to dry it up, and just let lying dogs lie, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you guys can help.
I'll answer at least the first question. I think some of them are a little too big for me, but in a context of Act 2, when PADB talks about institutional controls, that would be in the form of a uniform environmental covenant that would be recorded on the deed of the property, specifying what restrictions are to ensure that it could be used safely, in this case for a residential purpose. So that could be if there was like a 2-foot cap of clean soil, that you shouldn't be disturbing that 2-foot cap of clean soil, or which is highly probable that there would be vapor mitigation systems which need to be kept running to prevent TC vapors from entering the buildings. Those may also be used to kind of constrain what site activities can occur before the remediation takes place, which is presumably one of the things they're interested in doing sooner rather than later. So that is kind of the answer. It should, the environmental conditions and what needs to be done to stay safe on the site should really go with the deed of the property. How the legalities of what needs to be disclosed to a buyer, I'm not really qualified to speak to, but it's going to be on the deed.
Thank you.
Public speaking, but my name is Peggy Miros. We moved into the village in 1978. And my son and his friends played in the stream. Praise God, at this point they're okay. But my neighbor down the street, her husband worked at Bishop Tube and he died from cancer. And they were liable because they paid the medical bills for him. She's not here, she's not participating in this, she's in her 90s, and, you know, it's over to some extent for her, but the residue is still with us. But one basic question that I have is, who's paying for all this? Who's been paying for all of this? I mean, all of the work that has gone on in favor of this developer to assure that he can do what he wants to do here, who's paying for it? And it's my understanding that it is an extremely expensive, not a couple $1 million, but many, many millions of dollars to actually clean this to, like you said, residential standards. What's the term in the field to the dirt? Something, there's a phrase that people use, like cleaning it to the level of dirt, like if a kid was playing there, they would be safe. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of but I know what you mean.
Direct contact.
Yeah,
There we
yeah.
go.
Yeah,
Edible, well then,
yeah.
Dirt's good. It's good for the
incidental
stomach.
ingestion is, I think, the technical term.
So who is paying for it? All this expertise, you're
Well, I don't
Work.
think I can completely answer that question, and it has been quite complicated. PADEP has paid for some of the work, which ultimately means we all have.
pay for it.
The responsible party group associated with the site has paid for a lot of recent work. And I don't think at this time, until PADEP hashes out all the details, anybody knows exactly who's going to be paying, for the estimated $8 million or so of remediation. So I don't have an answer, but presumably some fraction of that would be the RP group, and
Why
can't
wouldn't
say
all
much
of
more
it
than
be?
that.
If they want to use
Well,
the land,
that's- That
This is a
sounds good to
question-
me. That I can't speak to.
Yeah, I understand, and this is, anything that I'm sounding aggressive about, it's not towards the two of you, I mean, or even to you guys, but this is kind of a question of environmental justice or injustice, I feel. Our neighborhood has really been scammed, and I think you guys know it. I mean, not to put you in the spot there, but I think you know it, and one of the former supervisors admitted after that person was no longer a supervisor, we should never have agreed to this. A lawyer who worked for one of the, I think it was what's the name of the? Johnson Matthey, that this should never be developed. It's the worst case, it was an environmental lawyer, the worst case that I've ever, come across. He was threatened by the folks from CDP for even making that comment. He didn't do it publicly, in this forum. And you all know that our neighbors were also brought, a lawsuit was brought by this entity, this CDP. Yeah, so, I mean, I have ill will towards this person and his company because he's not doing it for the benefit of anybody, either who are currently living there or new people who would be coming in. I mean, can you imagine yourselves with a deed that's spelling out all this technical stuff, and you're just there trying to have a life with your kids, your family? It's so wrong. The whole thing is wrong. The motivation is, questionable. There's been major trust issues. These places would have been built. They would have already been built had there not been the kind of pushback and legal expertise that we've had, people standing up. I don't really like to come and do it, but I have to. It's wrong. And like I said before, I think it's a matter of environmental justice, injustice. Thank you.
I didn't want to start speaking in case you wanted to say something. No, okay. So I have 3 questions and an offering. I will. Thank you for the reminder. My name's Maya Van Rossum. I'm the Delaware Riverkeeper. I'm here on behalf of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, including many members who live in the community. Our address is 925 Canal Street, Bristol, TOL, Pennsylvania, 19007. So here are my 3 questions that came up during the conversation, and then I promised Steve an offering. I promised you all an offering too. My first question was, how often, when the last time that I met with the Department of Environmental Protection, it was after a recent communication had come to the township or from the township about the development of the site. And the Department of Environmental Protection was dismayed because they had only learned about this communication. It's actually what resulted in what I think was their August 23rd letter. And they were just dismayed because they hadn't received a communication directly from the township about whatever the representation was from CDP. So I just wanted to check in to see if you are now having regular conversations, the township and/or the consultants, with the Department of Environmental Protection, not just about the remediation, but also about the development project and the connection with the remediation.
The answer is yes. We now regularly send them any material that we receive from the developer, any materials we receive from our consultants, whether they be BSTI or Aero, our civil engineers. I am in communications with Ragesh Patel and Bonnie McLennan and now Lisa Strobridge we don't have regularly scheduled Zoom calls, but we communicate regularly. I actually spoke with Bonnie today. So yeah, we're in, let's see, I would say since the summer, we've had probably 5 or 6 such meetings and conversations.
Great. Thank you very much. That's very helpful and good to hear that loop has been sort of closed. My second question really had to do with the access to the site for the remediation from the trucks. In the development proposal, it has included using General Warren Village as a potential future emergency access. That is something that the community very much opposes for many reasons, and the Delaware Riverkeeper Network opposes because it's going to require you crossing over that little stream, right? And having additional environmental impacts. As I understood you to say that you're not sure, but you're thinking that they would go in via Mail-in Road. So I guess I'm posing this as a question, but also a recommendation that the township have a communication with DEP and firm up what is going to be the access to that site for remediation. Because if it's not just Mail-in Road, but it means that during, post-development, that General Warren Village is going to also be opened up in order to accommodate the remediation, then that approval of their community as a cut-through for that development project is a foregone conclusion. And I imagine that would be excruciatingly upsetting and inappropriate and premature, and I'm sure that the community would like to know the answer to that, but it sounds like you have to get that answer from DEP, if I understand correctly. Okay, great.
I'm just going to try to answer that and say, I understand that the neighborhood is opposed to the emergency access. The access, if there is such an access, will only be for emergencies. It won't be to permit remediation activities to go through there. That's not the intent of it. And if there is an emergency access, it would only ever be built after the remediation because that would be the responsibility of the developer.
So appreciate your saying that, and that offers me the opportunity for clarification. I think my point really is to make sure that I'm pointing at you, but to make sure that the township goes to DEP and confirms with DEP that DEP is not planning to open up General Warren Village for purposes of remediation, because that has implications for the community, for the remediation, for the environment, and for what may or may not happen with the future use of that site and its relationship to General Warren Village. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I understand, and I will talk to them about that.
That would be great. Thank you. My third, I'm doing all my short questions. My offering's good. So the community has been working very hard to actually catalog the natural resources at the site, including special plants and wildlife, and collecting this information. And there's a lot of really beautiful, interesting, and valuable plant life and wildlife at the site. And so, the community's taken it upon themselves to do that because they care. But the truth is, under Article 1, Section 27, the preservation of the natural resources really is the obligation of government, including the township. And so I'm wondering if you have had any thoughts or plans to actually do your own municipal catalog of what are the natural resources at the site and what are the potential ramifications for those resources from, we're talking about remediation, so from the remediation plan, and or how might the special resources that are being identified be preserved. So is that somewhere in your worldview of how you're interacting with DEP and approaching analysis of this remediation and the potential ramifications?
It has not yet come up in that precise approach, but there's nothing wrong with that, and we
But it can
should
now.
look into it, absolutely.
Awesome. I
Sure.
appreciate that.
I mean, we have, one of the components of our comprehensive plan is identification of all the township's natural resources. Probably would need to be more refined for this site based on what we have already, but there's no reason why it can't.
So we actually have some great local expertise that has been involved in leading this effort, as well as worker bees from the community. So when you're ready, I think that would be a great place to start that conversation with them and their work. Okay. Okay. So now, sort of going into the offering. So when you were talking about, there was the really important question about future residents. If this site were to be developed, how would they be notified? And there's information in the title and supposedly in land transfer. But I mean, what that all ultimately comes down to for the township and for those potential future residents is buyer beware, and that doesn't really seem appropriate. While these people in the future, if the site were to be developed, I mean, they're your future residents. They're your responsibility. You have the opportunity to prevent harm to them by actually saying no to this development project. Because part of what's going on here, right, and part of what's happening with the request for final approval that CDP has put forth is they are asking for final approval right now to begin development in a staged approach prior to the remediation happening, and actually prior to the remediation being fully finalized, right? We don't actually know what the remediation is going to be in terms of implementation. The remediation hasn't actually been implemented, and we don't actually know if the remediation is going to be successful. That's the whole reason for the monitoring. So we may get to the end of all of this, and that site may still be seriously and dangerously contaminated for the environment, for the current residents today, and for the potential future residents. So see a lot of nodding heads, and so it seems like you're really embracing that responsibility, which we really, really appreciate. And one of the things I want to applaud you for is what you did, embracing that responsibility, was when you gave your pre-application, right, your pre-approval to the development project, you embraced the zoning hearing board mandates that the 3 hotspots be addressed, but then you also very wisely added an additional mandate that actually it's not just the 3 hotspots, that if DEP requires a greater level of remediation, that remediation has to be fully complied with, and DEP has to have approved it, right, before a shovel can go into the ground on this site that was really wise. And in fact, when the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and the Stoffers joining us challenged that pre-approval, and we were in court, your lawyer argued, look, we have all these criteria, right? We have all these protections for the community that will ensure no shovel in the ground prior to complete, final, full remediation. And the judge ruling against us relied on that promise. And that was part of the judge's determination. The community, when you did your pre-approval, when you did that defense in court and they read that court opinion and all along the way, right, the community has heard your promise and your assurance, no development, nothing until this remediation is done. That's such an incredible promise that you made to the community. It was a wonderful promise, and the community really appreciates it. But, you know, part of the problem is that we're sitting here now, again, with CDP pressing for final approval. And they don't only want final approval, right? But they want final approval, and they want to be able to start developing in the near term using some non-documented phased approach, right? They're going to do a phased approach, but they haven't provided any detail as to what that phased approach is, but they want you to approve a phased approach. And what we in the community are sitting here looking at, we have asked you multiple times at Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we've given you documentation to say, you can legally and scientifically and morally, you can set aside the morally, even though I believe in that, legally, you can say no. And you should say no. And here's how and why you can say no. Based on state law, based on township ordinance, and based on your constitutional obligations under Article 1, Section 27, to protect the rights of the people to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And yet you have made the decision not to say no, even though you have that authority. And so I'm perplexed, the community is perplexed, because it seems to suggest that you are actually contemplating saying yes to Constitution Drive Partners. So when we, and that perplexion has continued to this day, because between the DEP meeting when we sort of last had this discussion and now, CDP has asked for approval for their phased approach. But at that DEP meeting, I promised you, Supervisor Lambert, and I promised you, Steve Brown, that I would provide even additional information on how and why you can say no legally and based on the science. So I'm bringing forth additional information. I have both information, documenting the legal principles upon which you can say no, plus in addition to the Meliora engineering review we presented previously, an additional engineering review speaking very specifically to the most recent request from CDP for your approval. And so I'm going to give this to you. I also handed out, you can see, to the community. I'm going to give this to you and ask you again, don't ask for extensions, don't grant extensions or beg for extensions from CDP. Just say no. Because based on the law, based on the science, based on the Constitution, and based on every foundation you've laid to date legally, you have the authority to just say no and alleviate our environment and our communities and our people from the continuing threat of Constitution Drive Partners coming in and developing this site while it remains in a toxic condition, whether that development happens today, 7 years now, or 27 years from now. There is the potential that there will still be contamination there, and they don't care. So I'm going to give you my offering. I'm going to sit down and ask you, just say no at your next meeting, please.
Maya, I'll add that.
Oh, Kate, that Kate. I'm thinking, Kate, I didn't see Kate walking around. Boy, is there another Kate? That's sorry.
Maya, what I was going to say is that we recognize what you're providing to us. and we're not discounting it whatsoever. It's gonna be looked at through our solicitors and our ordinances, along with your comments. It will be reviewed. As I think we've always said it, you know, as much as possible, we will review this with our solicitors. Excuse me?
Deb,
Excuse me?
money. Deb Mobile, 42 Village Way, Malvern. Sorry I'm late. I will be watching the video in full. My newest granddaughter had the very last speaking part in the rescheduled Sugartown Elementary School concert. A couple of things, and if it's been discussed, please just tell me to shut up. It's okay. I can take it. I wanted to make a comment about, back to that whole in the deeds and what you're doing to people that are moving in. You know, allowing this to happen, allowing vapor systems to go into places, also puts an additional burden on the taxpayers of this township, because we have to hire more zoning officials, and zoning officials who have expertise in that area to monitor, to make sure that those vapor systems continue to be maintained and upgraded, and they haven't like plugged it up with, you know, like a gas insert for a fireplace or something like that, okay? A couple of things going back to the state program that we had at General Wayne. At that program, it was strongly recommended that the state have a contact person, a person that I as a citizen can call and say, wait a minute, this truck just came barreling down my street, or I see smoke coming up. We can call and ask our questions. Has that person been designated? Because everybody thought that was a great idea. And has that person been designated? Okay, well, then the state, that if you could take that, Steve, back to the state, that was a proposal that was suggested at that meeting, and everyone in that meeting, no one in that meeting said this is a stupid idea, okay? Or this can't be done. I would also like to know from the state, in terms of the cleanup efforts, how that air control is being monitored, and how are they going to post those results for me, the citizen? I don't want to have to wait till I've been breathing toxic air for 6 months to go to a meeting at General Wayne. I think that there should be, you know, whether it's, you know, I mean, how often does one monitor that? And you're the expertise in cleanup. What? Oh, okay. So.
No, and I think it is a good question and
Yeah.
worth, again, we don't know.
We don't know.
Because
Okay, well.
it needs to be determined
That
in
needs to be
the
determined.
remedial plan.
And what I'd like it to be determined is, how are they going to report it to the citizenry? Not to the township, you know, not to the people working on the site, but to the citizens that live in the neighborhoods that surround it. You know, I'm trying really hard to be educated. And quite frankly, I will look at those figures and I will say, Maya, what's going on here? I don't understand it, okay? But I am trying, and I should have the right to try. And the last thing, and I'll shut up, is I want to reiterate, God, nothing personal, but I didn't care for Nancy Reagan at all. The whole just say no thing, you know, but it is the point here. And if Euclid Township can do it, why can't East Whiteland? Are they smarter than you guys? I mean, they obviously they have more money. That's a whole other issue. But, you know, they were able to stop construction on toxic sites dead in its tracks. And why we haven't been able to do that is beyond me. There are laws on the book that protect me. The citizens don't want it. They can't prove that anybody can live there. You know, we have proved that people can't live there. So if other townships can do it, we should be able to do it too. And, you know, as you see, I'm getting busier, but I am also getting older, and I'm still here. But, this has got to stop. This merry-go-round with a builder who doesn't care about our township and where we live, and he doesn't even live here, he's not a citizen, it's got to end. Thank you.
I had want to rein it back in a little bit. I had a question for BSTI and about the PFAS, and I don't know too much about it, and it sounds pretty scary, and since it has no way of remediation. Is that something that would be detected, be able to be detected by the air monitoring?
Monitoring of PFAS in air is kind of a developing area. So yes, to an extent is the answer. Whether they would intend it to be part of the air monitoring is perhaps a little less likely. Some PFAS are volatile, but honestly, those are primarily the PFAS that they have not looked at. They've sampled only a sort of a limited list, and it's the ones that are typically more soluble and end up primarily in the water rather than the air. So it's technically possible, but whether it would occur as part of the monitoring, I would hesitate to guess. My guess would it probably wouldn't be their first thought.
I'm up. I'm Pete Goodman. My address is 2194 Valley Hill Road, Malvern. And I'm here representing Valley Forge chapter of Trout Unlimited, our 800 members. We have adopted Valley Creek as our home water, and it's a very special place to me and my fishing companions. It is contaminated with PCBs from the Paoli Rail Yard. And I don't know how those fish manage to get up into Valley Creek Park and still have PCP contamination, but they do, beyond the dam at North Valley Road. So I'm a little confused by that. As far as Bishop Tube goes, this has been an issue for a very long time, and we all recognize that. PFAS is kind of a new kid on the block, and I don't know whether that's something that can manifest itself into fish tissue or not. It can. Well, that's another nail in our coffin for Valley Creek, the creek that dies of 1,000 cuts. So I'm just here out of frustration, basically. It's like this has been ongoing it's been on my radar since probably 2005. And I've got a file that's, inches thick. And it looks like I'm going to build that file for another 23 years, only somebody else is going to have to take it over because I'm not planning on being around that long. So I'm just frustrated with the DEP's level of response, and I guess my questions to the township are you collectively, the township, going to continue with your consultants for 23 years to oversee the remediation plan and the remediation?
Again, I doubt I'll be here for 23 years.
Right.
Well, somewhere, hopefully. Here, only 2 more. But I am certain as long as Bishop Tube is what I consider active, being considered for anything, the township will be involved and will be retaining and continuing its consultants. There's no question about it. For the first time spent by the consultant, we received a grant, which was nice. After that, we didn't get anything else. this is our township resources that we're spending now. We're not waiting for anybody to give us money to retain the proper consultants. So,
I just want to say as well, there is at least one hand raised online. So certainly feel free to ask your question. I would like to get to the next one raised online just because it's been raised for quite a while.
Okay, you want me to go next?
Yeah, sure, yeah,
Okay.
please go ahead.
So just for the record, I'm Carol Armstrong. I'm at 4023 Howell Road, Malvern. I'm a lifelong scientist in the area of brain health, and since 2013 or 14, I started studying environmental science, and for the past 8 years have been training myself full-time in environmental science. So that's my interest here, and I've submitted a number of questions, as you may know, to the township back in August, so I guess I'm looking for your answers now. Yeah, it's dated August. So at the time, the revised or the last version of the application, there were not yet approvals from the Army Corps of Engineers, the PADEP, PennDOT, the Chester County Conservation District. Have all of those agencies approved that third, or is it the third application? The third one, I think. The last one.
The most recent submission, yeah. So I can assist with some of your
Okay.
questions. So we have requested additional information as well from the applicant about the status of their third-party, what I'll call third-party outside agency permits. I do not believe, I'm running through the list here, I don't believe any of them have been granted. Some of those application processes are underway, but we've requested similar status updates.
And some of those are what? Some of those,
Oh, I'm sorry, the applications have been initiated, those conversations with those agencies have been initiated, but I'm not aware of any of those outside agency permit approvals being granted.
okay, so my question is that you, East Whiteland, could request that the approvals be obtained, if they can be obtained, before reviewing the final proposal and making a decision on it. It's just reminder, the downside of the process of development goes all to East Whiteland. All the harm of that development goes to East Whiteland. And I'm not sure what the benefits are. Maybe, I don't even want to surmise because I really don't know. But, do they really outweigh all the environmental harms or all the human? So I just want to remind the township, that's what whether you're here or not, the harm goes to the township and its people. So yes, so you could request that the approvals be attained before you give your own decision. It's possible that their responses to those permits might change your mind about something. So I guess I'm not, you have something else you'd like to say about that?
no, I mean, we'll consider what our ability is to take that position. Unfortunately, that oftentimes comes down to what pending case law is and the law. And I know every unanimous pretty much that the development should be denied, and that's fine. In the event that my thinking on that is, if that is the decision, we want to make it as foolproof as possible so a court doesn't overturn it. That's a risk. It's the biggest risk, but I think it's pretty unlikely thinking that if the decision is a denial, that the decision won't be appealed to all the way up to.
You think it's likely it will be appealed?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I can't imagine not. So I'd rather go into a decision with that mindset, to know, to cross all the T's, dot all the I's, and consider all the risks either way. That'll be my thinking. I haven't gone through the file from the beginning yet. When the final plan was submitted, I asked Zach to put together a area of our site of everything that's been filed. And when we get to that stage, I know my approach will be to go from day one, reading every opinion, every review letter, every reviewing the plans, and consider the options.
Mhm. Thank you.
And Carol, to further what Rich is saying is one of the things that we have to be concerned about in this whole process is that potentially, if this were to be denied and go to court, the 17 conditions that exist now could potentially be stripped away. And we don't want that.
Yeah, and I am not a lawyer, and thank goodness there is, a lawyer advocating, that is Maya Van Ressem, and her lawyers who know not just municipal law, but also know state and federal law. Fortunately, they really, can answer, but it just seems to me that whatever these complications are in municipal law that you feel you're being entrapped by, forgive me for saying that, there are higher levels of law that override, even in Pennsylvania municipal law. As powerful as that may be, there are others, such as our, state constitutional right to not destroy the environment for something as arbitrary as housing that isn't really necessary. So it seems to me there must be, and as I say, Maya has says that she's provided you with a lot of that law to be used for that purpose. I know municipalities work on municipal law level, I understand that, but I'm just saying. So I'll stop trying to talk. Another question here is, and I'm sorry I did come in late, I was working, but I'm going to pose it anyway. I understand it came up already. So this thing about in the last, I think, anyway, the most recent proposal from the developer was to add another 0.42 mile of road. My question is, was that in the first proposal? No, because they said that this is new. This was a new request, 0.42 additional. And I was wondering, was there something in the conditional approval that you gave that referenced that? Was that considered before? Was it denied before?
So I would just need to look back at the specific document that you're referencing. It's probably like one of the, either a waiver request or a cover letter or something to that effect from the applicant, but there aren't, and I'm looking at your questions here. So I do have them in front of me. I have the benefit of them in front of me. So there aren't any variances required for lots to face on private streets. In this case, the township has expressed that we're not interested in owning these roads like we have in similarly configured townhouse developments. They did receive a waiver so variances are from the zoning ordinance and other things in other law. A waiver from the subdivision and land development ordinance was granted in order to allow these homes to front on privately owned by the HOA streets. In other words, for them to not become township roads. So there was a waiver granted. There is no variance required for that. There is no prior conditional use approval or process in place that would govern any of this.
So you're saying that because of the agreement that their roads, private and not roads, that your conditional approval originally doesn't cover how many roads they put in?
Yeah, so we wouldn't regulate the length of roads, right? We have standards for how wide a road must be depending on its function. We have standards for how high a curb must be, for example. There was and it's probably a somewhat antiquated code now, but one that requires homes to front on public streets. They requested a waiver from the ordinance in order for these roads to not be required to front on public streets so that the roads could be private. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm happy to explain it another way,
Yeah,
but
no, you were very clear.
sure.
So my next question, and I don't know about diagonal storm sewers, I just thought I should find out. This is something new in the third proposal, and just want to know what the impact of that, of the greater number of diagonal storm sewer crossings might be on the rate of discharge to Valley Creek. Discharge, just to make a point, is both the volume and the speed of water. So it's a very destructive force that comes through our sewer system. So I don't know anything about these sewers, and I don't know whether these diagonal sewers impact diagonal sewers impact the rate of stormwater runoff on streets.
So the idea, as I understand it, behind the diagonal storm crossings, is that when you, in the
But they're
street.
additional ones, is what I'm saying. These are additional, right? Aren't these
Yeah, I
additional
think the
ones?
code requirement states that they should be minimized. The diagonal crossing should be minimized. And some of that is for predictability of where they might be, if they needed to be excavated for some reason. It's just one example. In this case, they're asking to make them diagonal. I'll call it diagonal horizontally, not vertically, such that it would be a greater slope and then
Okay.
potentially would increase the rate of
Discharge.
discharge. In this case, we would not anticipate any, maybe a negligible increase in the discharge rates based on whether or not they're diagonal.
Okay. So one of the aspects of protecting an exceptional value watershed is to protect it from excessive and unnatural discharge rates. So the addition of the 0.42 mile of private roads is going to allow more impervious surface, it's going to allow more runoff, it's going to allow faster and more greater volume of discharge. It is going to, I mean, to say something, you know, Pete used the term 1,000 cuts, I mean, to say something is negligible really can't be said at the point where there's so much impervious surface and something's being harmed already, to then say, oh, if I kill you a little bit more, it's negligible. I mean, that doesn't work like that. So I'm just having to make that point to say that more impervious surface does hurt the stream and the aquatic life more. It does add more sediment to the Delaware estuary.
Sure. So I understand the metaphor, and maybe to clarify the diagonal aspect, it's not anticipated that the fact that they are diagonal would increase is more what I was getting
No, I'm
at.
talking about the 0.42 extra
Yeah.
road now.
So with and just maybe to zoom out a bit, the development, the existing condition out there, the existing building, parking areas, things like that, is about 330,000 square feet of impervious surface, so pavement, buildings, things like that. The proposed condition is about 220,000 square feet.
Say
So
those two numbers again, please. I'm sorry.
Oh, so we'll use round numbers because I don't know the exact number either. We'll call it 330,000 square feet of impervious
Is
in
the current
existing.
design.
Correct. And 220, give or take, is the proposed. So they'll be reducing the overall amount of impervious coverage. Obviously, where it's being located, where it's being focused on the site will be different. There will be basins and things like that. So there should be an overall reduction in the amount of runoff coming off the
So
site.
that
And it
300
should be treated, because there's currently no real stormwater control measures, it should be treated both for rate control and water quality management in the proposed condition at the very least.
I just want to double check, that 330,000 is the one that you gave the proposal you gave conditional approval to, or the one before you gave conditional approval?
So the current plan, those are the,
Is less than the 330, but when was that did you approve the
so the current plan is very similar in design, layout, overall coverages and things like that to the approved preliminary plan. So whether the numbers are exactly the same, I couldn't say off the top of my head, but they should be substantially similar.
So the reduction comes only in this third or final, or most recent, excuse me,
So
Or
there
the
are
most
previous
recent?
plans likely that have a higher
Okay.
proposed condition, but I think overall, the preliminary plan and the current plan are a notable decrease in impervious surface.
So in the most recent proposal, the applicant was requesting more parking spaces. I don't know if you're saying, oh, we're not regulating that, we can't deny it based on that, but doesn't that seem like a lot for 86 residences?
It does sound like a lot, yes. With the way they're calculating their parking requirements, so we have an ordinance requirement that states for any use, whether it's a home or a business, minimum parking, off-street parking requirements. And what we require for this is 2 spaces per dwelling unit, so 172 spaces. In order to satisfy that requirement, they are counting both their 2-car garage and their 2-car driveway. So basically 4 spaces
Per housing
technically
unit.
per house. So the remaining, I think it's 15 spaces are just some small visitor parking areas.
But
So
this
it sounds like a lot, but
I thought this was this was an increased number of parking spaces than they had previously.
so I would have to compare to previous plans. The current number of units is the lowest it's been since this saga began. There were some additional parking spaces that were requested by the township just for practical purposes of people having people over. But those 15 spaces they were able to kind
Okay.
of wiggle in, I would say are not substantial. It's clearly more impervious to add this parking, but overall I would say it's a minimal increase.
I understand that better now, thank you. So, so the extra .42 mile of road and other road, it may be under regulation by the HOA, but it still is regulated by the Pennsylvania Streams Act. And they require, so, that the aquatic life be measured in an exceptional value creek prior to developing a major amount of new impervious surface, so that the percentage of macroinvertebrates and other aquatic life does not decrease from the required integrated biotic index that was of 83% that's required for an exceptional value creek, exceptional value. So that means that before, I don't know if the remediation, is the remediation going to add any impervious surface? Mr. Representative from Best? I don't know his name.
Nick,
Oh,
or Tony.
yeah.
Yeah,
Are you going to, is RUE going to be adding any impervious surface?
I think the short answer would probably be no, because the remediation will actually require removal of some of the existing impervious surfaces.
Okay.
And I think that was part of the original point, that there
And
is quite a large existing impervious area.
So I don't mean, is the net increase are they going to make a net increase? I just wondered if making any increase, whether it's net or not. Does remediation require
Not to
adding?
my knowledge, I don't believe there'll be any permanent structures associated with the remediation.
So that means that the Pennsylvania Clean Water Protection isn't required for the engineers to do their work, but it is required before. I'm sorry, okay.
No, you're doing
All right. Just want to make that point, that those measurements need to be made before. Oh, this is kind of important one to me. Have the wetlands been mapped
Yes.
by?
So there's available data on that. There is also, they've been field verified by the engineer. If you look, I know the plan set's quite large, but there is a note that speaks to the source data.
Okay, and I guess just the last point I want to make is some towns, not only in various states and around the country, are asking their developers to use data that projects the likely changes in precipitation and flooding risks and so on from future storms, to use climate change data in their calculations, because you don't have the power of the law to say, oh, you have to alter your methods because they're not, we don't have those laws yet. But I just want to say that that is an option, that you can simply say that I'd like you to account for the changes in climate that are coming in your proposal. Thank you.
So I did accidentally, I suppose now, I did tell, I guess it's Barb Arnold. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I am zooming from Florida tonight, so that's why I'm not there. I will say that most of my questions actually were spoken by others, and so I just wanted to just kind of make a couple of quick comments. First, I hope the supervisors will give serious review of and consideration to Maya's offering detailing the legality of the township's criteria for development. To me, for the developer to challenge our township's right to set conditions like that, especially at a toxic site, and conditions that are for the purpose of protecting current and future community members, to me, it's just outrageous. And, we should be able to say what we want in our township. So I hope that you will really pay attention to what Maya has to offer, because I think it will give you a leg to stand on. Something else that caught my attention in the slideshow, the very first slide mentioned that Bishop Tube was entered into the PADEP HASCA program back in 1999. That's been 25 years this year. And, almost no action has been taken in 25 years. And that's just sad and shocking. And, I just, that just really caught my attention, and I wanted to share that with all of you as well. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for holding this meeting. It's important to us community members. There are 20 other people online, so I wanted you to know that in addition to the folks that are sitting there right now, there's another 20 people who've been sitting through this whole meeting. So, we do care, and we look forward to continued interaction to get this whole thing resolved once and for all. Thank you so much. Oops, I'm sorry, I forgot to say Barbara Arnold, 31 Fonstock Road, sorry. Okay.
Hi, Joan Smallwood, 402 Worthington Road. I'm actually in Euclid Township now, but as most of you know, I was a 26-year resident at 51 Village Way in this township. One of the comments, one question that I have, and it's just as roles, is your firm, assuming, okay, of course, I don't want to see any development at Bishop Tube, but assuming everything goes horribly wrong and he does start development, is your firm the one that's going to be sort of doing the day-to-day, looking over the developer's shoulder to make sure that he is doing what he's supposed to be doing? And if not, who is?
Well, I mean, I think the first answer is obviously that PADEP should be the primary person looking over the developer's shoulder, but...
Who is there for the community, since we all know that PADEP has sided with its developer on numerous occasions in the past, and obviously has shown complete disregard for the citizens of this community. So I guess to rephrase my question, who is looking out for the interest of the community should development start at this site?
That would probably, Steve.
Well, yeah, let me try to answer.
You know what I mean.
I understand. Let me try to answer it as best I can. I mean, it's, first of all, the township uses a civil engineer, so a lot of the things that Zach was talking about, the road construction and the curb construction, stormwater installation, that's all monitored by our civil engineer. And I know that may not be exactly what you're asking, but that's important, especially as we talked about stormwater and discharges to the stream. It's very important to monitor that. So what the township and townships, at least in my experience and since I've been here, we have not ventured into engaging a firm like BSTI to help with, I'll say, everything else, the environmental, the air monitoring that we talked about earlier. That is not what Aero would do. And I would look to the board, and I would suggest that we consider, if in the end the plan gets approved, and if in the end it ever gets built, I would suggest that we consider doing something like engaging BSTI to help monitor it.
The reason that I mention this is that, as I said, I am in Euclid Township, so I left being right down the road from Bishop Tube and unknowingly moved right down the road from yet another contaminated site, the Gray Brothers site in Euclid Township. It is being developed by the same developer. He has shown, again, utter disregard for both the management of Euclid Township and the citizens of Euclid Township. Euclid has an ordinance that requires full remediation of a toxic site before any building can be done. He actually took the township, so they exercised that law, and he took the township to court, claiming that he did not know what remediation meant. All right, this is why you have to watch this man, and this is why I asked what oversight is going to be there. The judge's opinion is out on Euclid Township's website, and it is a very scathing opinion, and it's an amusing read if you have some time. The Euclid Township just last month at the Board of Supervisors meeting in January approved a settlement agreement with the developer. And that settlement agreement is also on Euclid Township's website. I have not had time to read the whole thing yet, but there was a packed meeting in January at the Board of Supervisors meeting. From what I understand, part of the settlement agreement is requiring that the site be cleaned up to DEP standards prior to any shovel hitting the ground for development. There is also they've also put something in there that said they have an initial fund of $20,000 to enable the township to hire a consultant to oversee the actions of this developer, since he has proven himself to be so dishonest and untrustworthy. I stood up and I said, well, $20,000 doesn't go far in today's world. And one of the supervisors, while I was there, reread that part of the agreement. At that point, it had not been made public. And he said that was an initial agreement that the developer put up, and that they can go back to him for more money. They reserve the right to replenish that agreement. That might be something that you might want to consider. Again, I would be, as Euclid Township supervisors have said in public that they don't trust this developer as far as they could throw him, that you might want to take the same approach and look out for the citizens. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't stand very long. My knee is in horrible shape. My name is Bob Logan. I'm a township resident, 790 Bass Cove. I have, I think, 3 different things I want to say here. There was a question, a little discussion about, well, how will the community be able to monitor, assuming this thing ever gets started, and how can they monitor what's going on? And without showing my age, I can remember when the Blue Route was being built. Not the first part that only stayed in Radford, but the whole thing got done. And there was enough opposition and demands that there was it may have been weekly or bi-weekly, there was actually a newsletter that I used to get every time it came out, and that had pictures, and it gave a description of the progress of all the various portions of the Blue Route as the work was being done.
I think it's safe to say that with modern technology, I don't think it'll be a newsletter that comes in the mailbox anymore, but I certainly think with a website or the internet or something, it seems like that would be something that could be handled pretty well. My second thing, I have to look at this, if you don't mind. I'm throwing this term around all night. PFAS, I think is how you're saying it. I kept sitting there, what the heck is this? So thanks to the handy dandy internet, I Googled, and I think the place that I found has a little bit of an environmental slant to this, but PFAS stands for a word with more syllables than I can count to, but it says it's in more than 12, it consists of more than 12,000 chemicals found in food packaging, carpets, non-stick pans, personal care products like shampoo and sunscreen, and even firefighting foam. So I don't know if they're talking about the same stuff you're talking about, but it's everywhere. The next sentence says, U.S. Geological Survey recently found that almost half of the nation's tap water is estimated to contain PFAS. So this sounds like scary stuff. That's just for my education. I'm trying to pass that along. And this is, I guess I have maybe like a rhetorical question. I believe that Pennsylvania wants this place cleaned up, regardless of what happens. So that seems to be a process that has to be done carefully. And what the next step is, to me, is maybe a separate point. I live in the township, but I don't live in that particular community. We know people who do. It seems like there's a lot of opposition to the builder getting his homes in there and not to say get what he wants, but get his project completed. I've also, and I hate to say I have heard, and they said it, but people want to build a park there. No development, but just have the place cleaned up and make it a park. Well, I don't know that you can make it safe enough to have kids playing there, or adults or whomever playing in a park. So I don't know what all the options are with this property. That's kind of above my pay grade, but it seems like there's not a whole lot, and I hope it all works out well. Great, thanks.
Thanks. I guess I will just add, kind of in the Act 2 process, there are various steps you can use to control potential exposure, and kind of I mentioned, the possibility of, okay, you can't clean up the soil enough, so you may put on a 2-foot cap of clean soil that's supposed to remain undisturbed. All those same types of controls, engineering and institutional, can be applied to a park as well, and frequently are actually in urban settings. So it is possible, the same way it is possible for a residential use to clean a site up for recreational use.
But I guess if there's a prevailing opinion that you can't make it clean enough for people to live in homes there, then how can you make it clean enough for people to play there?
Yeah, I mean, the exposures are similar. We kind of joked about kids eating dirt, but that is one of the main concerns. The amount of time you spend in a park is less, which helps. We don't need to get into risk assessment, but it is possible. It's just a question of how it's implemented.
So just for clarification for the record, the community has not been asking for that kind of park. The community's been asking for the property to be preserved as public natural open space. What that would look like could be a lot of things, but I don't think anybody's been talking about jungle gyms and the kind of park I think that you're talking about. So I just wanted to clarify that. I do also want to make sure that the supervisors are aware, one of the biggest concerns that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, well, there are a lot of big concerns about all this. But one of the big concerns Delaware Riverkeeper Network had about the final remediation plan that DEP proposed to the degree that, or has approved to the degree they've been giving their approvals to the plan, but there's still more to be done, was the fact that they did not include PFAS. That the data regarding PFAS came out after the close of the public comment period, and it is one of the reasons why the Delaware Riverkeeper Network once again had to get involved with legal action. So I personally think that it would be very helpful if the municipality, and there's a lot that's happening with that legal action that I can't talk about, but it would be very helpful, I think, if the municipality were to express to the DEP how deeply concerned the community is about the finding of PFAS at the site and the fact that PFAS is not a priority, highlighted and addressed concern in the remediation plan at this time. They're going to give you some answers, and I can guess what they're going to be, but it really is very, very concerning that they did not reopen the whole process and the public record after they got their data with regards to the PFAS contamination. And I just wanted you to know that, and I think that, again, it would be valuable for them to hear from you. And Vic, just one comment, and I'm only doing because I thought it was kind of funny. You were talking about people getting up to speed on PFAS now today. Well, you know, of course, the government and industry and the military have known about the ramifications of PFAS for a long time, and there's a whole lot of information out there about PFAS and how it gets into the environment and what it does and all the various pathways. And in fact, there's a book called The Green Amendment, which talks about your constitutional obligations to protect the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania as well as other states. So you should read the chapter on PFAS. It's just my recommendation.
I thought earlier, when we were mentioning there still needs to be additional pre-remediation investigation, one of the components of that was PFAS, right?
Right. No,
Okay.
they have specifically identified additional sampling for PFAS in both soil and groundwater as one of the needs to develop the remedial design. Obviously, I can't speak to exactly how much weight they're giving it, but that is one of the needs they identified.
Thankfully, EPA finally did come through, and they said, A, PFAS is hazardous. That's very important because that puts it in a different scale. Before, it was just not good stuff. Their level of tolerance, the MCL, the maximum concentration level for a safe level, is 0, and that's what they are standing by. If so much as 4 parts per trillion is found in a sample of water, then that must be remediated. All of your drinking water must be sampled. If it is found to have PFAS in it, then that company that is supplying the water must solve that. This is not, well, let's think about doing this. This is to be done. What is now being projected, and I think some steps have been made for regulations involving wastes, which is going to apply to what is going to be done here. Because these are PFAS. You think that because it was sampled in one spot that that's the only place? That's not the way PFAS works. A, it's airborne. So you have particulates, and that's probably how some of the people have become contaminated around here, was from the particulates that traveled around. And then who knows who has it in their water, because that was never sampled. The stream that Pete mentioned has PFAS. We know that because it was sampled and found. We don't know about the little Valley Creek, but you have got to assume it has PFAS too. And if you read Ron Slota's book about Chester County's hydrogeology, and he wrote the book, you have karst topography all throughout here, which is how the TCE got to travel where it did. And don't think that the PFAS didn't think that was groovy too. And so it's gone everywhere. So you have to recognize that and deal with that first in your thinking. So as soon as Mr. O'Neill puts his shovel into the ground, he's releasing PFAS. So that's it. It's not that you can't do something. You can, but you've got to stand up and say, okay, this is what's going to be done and this is what's not going to be done. I would ask Mr. O'Neill what his plans for disposal are, how he plans to treat it. Just be interesting to hear what he has to say. So thank you. Really, I do appreciate this all. I just appreciate being able to have my mouth go.
So we're at 10 after 9. Zach, any other questions that exist out there on Zoom?
Well, seeing it currently, I guess this is last call.
And I'll offer the audience one last call if there's anything that they thought of to add. Hearing none, I call this meeting to adjournment. Thank you.